Before the prince became the Impaler, he was a child left behind as a guarantee of another man's loyalty.
20 years later, that hostage entered an army camp at night, hunting the most powerful sultan in Europe.
But how did a mortal Wallachian prince become history's most famous vampire?
Long before Dracula became a vampire, the name belonged to a mortal prince. He did not sleep in a Transylvanian castle, command the dead, or drink human blood. He was Vlad III, a 15th-century ruler of Wallachia, a small, vulnerable principality lying between the Carpathian Mountains and the Danube. Centuries after his death, fragments of his name and reputation would become associated with Bram Stoker's fictional Count. Yet the extent to which Stoker truly based his character on Vlad remains debated. The historical prince and the literary vampire are connected, but they are not the same figure. Even the beginning of Vlad's life is uncertain. He was probably born between 1428 and 1431, with 1431 being the date most often repeated. Tradition places his birth in Sighisoara, a fortified Saxon town in Transylvania, then part of the Kingdom of Hungary. His father was living there during this period, making the claim plausible. But no surviving birth record proves the exact house, date, or circumstances. The brightly painted building now promoted as Vlad's birthplace belongs more securely to tourism than to documented history. Vlad's father was Vlad II, a claimant to the throne of Wallachia and an illegitimate son of the respected Prince Mircea the Elder. In 1431, Vlad II entered the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric fraternity associated with King Sigismund of Hungary and committed, at least in principle, to defending Christian territories against the Ottoman advance. From this membership came the title Dracul, commonly understood in this context as the dragon. The word later also carried the meaning of devil in Romanian, helping darker interpretations grow around the family name. Vlad III would eventually use Dracula, meaning the son of Dracul, or the son of the dragon. To his contemporaries, it identified his lineage. Only much later would it become inseparable from supernatural horror. Far less is known about Vlad's mother. Some historians have connected her to the ruling family of Moldavia, but her identity is not established with certainty. Vlad grew up among several brothers, including the elder Mircea and the younger Radu. Each boy was born into a dynasty in which blood offered a claim to power but provided little protection from betrayal. Wallachia was not a peaceful hereditary kingdom. Its princes depended upon powerful landowning nobles known as boyars, and rival branches of the ruling Basarab family repeatedly fought for the throne. Hungary exerted pressure from the north and west. From the south, the expanding Ottoman Empire demanded tribute, loyalty, and military cooperation. A prince might survive by serving one power, bargaining with the other, and changing allegiance when circumstances required. Such choices were often described as treason by whichever side felt abandoned. In 1436, Vlad II secured the Wallachian throne. The young Vlad therefore entered a court shaped by guarded conversations, foreign envoys, shifting alliances, and the constant possibility of removal. There is no reliable evidence that he was already unusually cruel as a child. Later stories often read his adult reputation backward into his youth, creating a boy who seemed destined to become a monster. The surviving records do not allow that conclusion. What they reveal instead is a child raised inside a dangerous political frontier. His father wore the dragon's name while trying to satisfy both Christian Hungary and the Muslim Ottoman Empire. That balance could never remain stable for long. In 1442, the Ottoman Sultan summoned Vlad II to account for his loyalty. Vlad and his younger brother Radu accompanied their father south. The journey would transform the two princes from privileged sons into political guarantees, living hostages held to secure their father's obedience. For Vlad, the road toward the Ottoman court was also the beginning of a far darker education. Part 2, Hostage of the Sultan. In 1442, Vlad entered the Ottoman Empire not as a prisoner of war, but as something more valuable. The son of a prince whose loyalty could not be trusted. Sultan Murad II eventually allowed Vlad II Dracula to return to Wallachia. His sons, however, remained behind. Vlad and his younger brother Radu became living guarantees that their father would continue paying tribute and avoid openly supporting the Ottoman Empire's enemies. If he broke his promises, the consequences could fall upon them. Their precise movements during captivity are difficult to reconstruct. Contemporary Ottoman accounts indicate that the brothers were confined for a time at Egrigaz, a fortress in western Anatolia. They may also have spent periods closer to the Ottoman court at Edirne. Later traditions place them in several different locations. But the surviving evidence does not support a complete itinerary. They were valuable political hostages, not ordinary captives abandoned in a dungeon. As the sons of a neighboring ruler, they were likely educated, supervised, and prepared for possible future use in Ottoman diplomacy. Vlad probably learned Turkish and became familiar with court ceremony, military organization, and the methods by which the empire governed its frontier territories. More elaborate claims about his studies, including detailed lists of languages and subjects, come largely from later accounts and should be treated cautiously. The Ottoman world he encountered was disciplined, multilingual, and rapidly expanding. Murad II ruled through soldiers, administrators, provincial governors, and networks of dependent princes. For a young Wallachian claimant, this was an education in how power could be maintained by reward, fear, negotiation, and carefully displayed punishment. Yet it would be misleading to claim that Ottoman captivity simply transformed Vlad into the violent ruler he later became. Medieval courts across both Christian and Muslim Europe used harsh punishments. Impalement itself was not an exclusively Ottoman practice. It was also known in parts of Hungary and Transylvania. Vlad's later methods developed within a wider political culture in which public violence was used to proclaim authority. The two brothers appear to have responded differently to their surroundings. Radu remained in Ottoman service and eventually formed a close political relationship with the future Sultan Mehmed II. Vlad, by contrast, later became one of the empire's most dangerous opponents. This contrast has inspired stories of affection, rivalry, humiliation, and hatred. Most of those private emotions, however, were not recorded by reliable contemporary witnesses. Even Radu's religious identity is less certain than popular retellings suggest. He is often said to have converted to Islam during his years at the Ottoman court, but the direct documentary evidence is limited. What is clear is that he adapted successfully to Ottoman political life and later accepted Ottoman support against his own brother. While Vlad waited far from home, his father attempted to survive between two great powers. In 1444, a Christian crusading army advanced toward the Ottoman heartlands. Vlad too hesitated to join the campaign, knowing that his younger sons remained in the Sultan's hands. Nevertheless, a Wallachian force under Vlad's elder brother Mircea joined the Crusaders. The campaign ended in disaster near Varna. Sultan Murad's army defeated the Christian coalition, and King Ladislav III of Poland and Hungary was killed. John Hunyadi, the powerful Hungarian commander, survived, but his relationship with Vlad II continued to deteriorate. For the hostages, the defeat may have brought relief, danger, or both. No surviving record tells us what Vlad thought when news from Varna reached the Ottoman court. We know only that he remained in Ottoman custody while the political structure of his family slowly collapsed. By 1447, Vlad II had renewed his accommodation with the Ottomans. Hunyadi regarded him as unreliable and invaded Wallachia. The prince fled but was captured and killed near Baltini. Vlad's elder brother Mircea also died during the upheaval. Later accounts describe him being blinded and buried alive by hostile boyars, though the exact circumstances are not documented consistently enough to reconstruct with certainty. A rival from another branch of the Basarab dynasty, Vladislav II, was placed on the Wallachian throne. In the space of a few weeks, Vlad had lost his father, his elder brother, and his immediate place in the succession. The boy who had entered Ottoman territory as a political guarantee was now a young claimant without a country. But to the Ottoman authorities, that made him useful. Beyond the Danube stood a throne occupied by a prince aligned with Hungary. In Ottoman hands waited the son of the murdered dragon, a young man who knew the language of the empire, understood the frontier, and now possessed a powerful reason to return home. In 1448, the gates of captivity began to open. Vlad would cross the Danube not as a free wanderer, but behind an Ottoman army, marching toward the throne that had belonged to his father. Part 3, A Throne Won and Lost. In the autumn of 1448, Vlad crossed the Danube with Ottoman soldiers behind him and his father's throne somewhere ahead. The moment had been carefully chosen. Vladislav II, the ruler installed after the deaths of Vlad's father and elder brother, had left Wallachia to join John Hunyadi's campaign against the Ottoman Empire. With the reigning prince absent and much of his military strength far to the south, the road to the Wallachian capital stood unusually exposed. Vlad entered the principality in early October. He was still a young man, probably no more than 20, and he owed his opportunity to the empire that had held him hostage. Ottoman support did not make him a servant without ambition, but it came at a price. The important Danube fortress of Giurgiu fell under direct Ottoman control and was strengthened as a military position. For the first time, Vlad sat upon the throne of Wallachia. Almost nothing certain is known about what he did during this brief reign. There is no reliable evidence of a great campaign of punishment, no documented transformation of the government, and no reason to place the famous stories of impalement in these few unsettled weeks. His authority was new, dependent upon foreign troops, and probably recognized unevenly across the country. Then the political situation changed. Between the 17th and 20th of October, Murad II defeated Hunyadi's army at the Second Battle of Kosovo. The victory strengthened Ottoman power in the Balkans, but it did not secure Vlad's throne. Vladislav II survived the campaign and returned to Wallachia with the remnants of his forces. Vlad could not hold his position. By early December, his first reign was over. The throne had been his for no more than several weeks. He withdrew into Ottoman territory, probably returning first to Edirne. His failure revealed a lesson that would shape the rest of his life. Possessing a legitimate claim was not enough. A Wallachian prince needed soldiers, money, foreign allies, and support among at least part of the boyar nobility. Without them, a coronation could become an exile almost overnight. In 1449 or 1450, Vlad moved to Moldavia. The exact date and route are uncertain. He found refuge at the court of Bogdan II, whose possible family connection to Vlad has been discussed but cannot be established with complete confidence. Bogdan's son Stephen, the future Stephen the Great, was also there. Later, Stephen and Vlad would support one another at crucial moments, although the closeness of their relationship during these early years is not clearly documented. Moldavia offered safety but not permanence. It was another principality divided by rival claimants and vulnerable to interference from Hungary, Poland, and the Ottoman Empire. In October 1451, Bogdan II was murdered during a night attack led by his rival, Peter Aaron. Later accounts provide dramatic details about the killing, but the exact sequence of events remains uncertain. Vlad once again found himself close to a fallen court. He and the young Stephen were forced to seek safety elsewhere. By about 1452, Vlad had entered Transylvania. This placed him in a remarkable political position. He now sought protection within the sphere of John Hunyadi, the same Hungarian commander whose intervention had led to his father's overthrow and death. It was not forgiveness, it was survival. Hunyadi initially had little reason to trust him. Vlad had taken the Wallachian throne with Ottoman assistance, while Hunyadi had supported Vladislav II. Yet alliances on this frontier rarely remained permanent. Vladislav gradually moved toward an accommodation with the Ottomans, and Vlad became more useful to Hungary as a rival claimant. During these years, Vlad lived near the Transylvanian frontier and became familiar with its fortified towns, mountain roads, Saxon merchants, and competing political factions. The surviving evidence does not allow a complete account of his activities between 1452 and 1456. These were years of waiting, negotiation, and preparation rather than a continuous recorded adventure. Beyond the mountains, the balance of power was changing. In 1453, Sultan Mehmed II captured Constantinople. The Byzantine capital fell after more than 1,000 years, and the Ottoman Empire emerged as an even greater force in southeastern Europe. For Hungary, control of the Danube frontier became increasingly urgent. Wallachia could serve either as a shield against Ottoman expansion or as a road leading north. By 1456, Hunyadi needed a dependable ruler south of the Carpathians. Vlad needed an army. Their interests finally met. That summer, while Mehmed II advanced against Belgrade and Hunyadi prepared the city's defense, Vlad moved into Wallachia with Hungarian support and with the backing of Wallachian nobles who accepted his claim. The date and circumstances of the campaign are not recorded consistently. Some later traditions describe Vlad killing Vladislav II in personal combat, but the surviving evidence does not allow that dramatic scene to be treated as certain. What is certain is that Vladislav died during the struggle and Vlad seized the throne. 8 years had passed since his first fragile reign. He had lived as an Ottoman hostage, an Ottoman-backed prince, a fugitive in Moldavia, and a claimant protected by Hungary. He had served one side, then approached the other. Not because the frontier allowed loyalty to remain simple, but because every alliance was temporary. In 1448, Vlad had entered Wallachia behind an Ottoman army. In 1456, he returned with Hungarian support. This time he intended to remain. And before he could confront the Ottoman Empire beyond his borders, he would first turn against the enemies he believed were waiting within them. Part 4: The Government of Fear. When Vlad recovered the Wallachian throne in 1456, he inherited a principality in which rulers had rarely been secure. Boyar families controlled land, armed followers, and access to the court. Some had helped remove one prince and replace him with another whenever foreign support or private advantage made such a change possible. Vlad's own father and elder brother had died in this world of shifting loyalties. The new prince had no intention of becoming its next victim. In September 1456, Vlad sent the first surviving letter from his second reign to the citizens of Brasov. He promised assistance if the Ottomans attacked Transylvania, but also requested help should they occupy Wallachia. The letter contained a revealing observation. A strong prince could negotiate peace on his own terms, while a weak one would have another power impose its will upon him. Strength, in Vlad's understanding, was not merely desirable. It was the condition of survival. Soon after taking power, he began changing the political leadership of Wallachia. The Byzantine historian Leonikos Chalkikondyles wrote that Vlad executed many influential people, confiscated their property, and distributed wealth to his own followers. Surviving lists from the princely council also show a remarkable turnover. Only a small number of senior officials retained their positions through the following years. These changes suggest a deliberate effort to weaken older networks and build a court personally loyal to the prince. Some of those punished may have been connected to the deaths of Vlad's father and brother. Others may simply have been considered unreliable or too powerful. The evidence does not allow every victim to be identified, and it cannot prove that all of them had betrayed him. Vlad was not carrying out a modern reform against an unjust social class. He still relied on nobles, landowners, soldiers, and court officials. What he sought was not the disappearance of the boyars, but their obedience, and the replacement of dangerous men with dependents whose position came from him. A famous story places the most dramatic purge during an Easter feast at Targovist. According to a much later Romanian chronicle, Vlad invited leading boyars to dine, questioned them about how many princes they had served, and then punished those he blamed for Wallachia's instability. The older nobles were said to have been executed, while younger captives were marched into the mountains and forced to rebuild Poenary Fortress. The story may preserve a memory of real confiscations, executions, and compulsory labor. Poenary was indeed strengthened under Vlad and became closely associated with him. Yet the detailed Easter scene appears in sources written long after his death. It should therefore be presented as tradition, not as a complete eyewitness account. What is beyond serious doubt is that Vlad used public execution as an instrument of government. Among his methods, impalement became the most notorious. It was designed not only to kill but to remain visible. The condemned body became a warning placed before subjects, rivals, or invading armies. The message was simple: resistance would be remembered and punishment would be displayed. Vlad did not invent this execution. Impalement was already known in the Ottoman world, Hungary, and parts of Transylvania. Recent historical research indicates that his methods were probably influenced by practices on both sides of the frontier. What distinguished Vlad was the frequency with which he ordered collective impalements and the political theater he created around them. Even so, the enormous death tolls later attached to his name are not reliable. Hostile reports claim tens of thousands of impaled victims, but such figures were often written to portray him as a monster. Modern analysis suggests that only a fraction of the numbers reported in medieval narratives is plausible. This does not make his rule humane. It means that documented brutality must be separated from numerical exaggeration. Vlad himself was not commonly called Teeps in surviving Wallachian documents from his lifetime. He used forms of the name Dracula, identifying himself as the son of Dracula. Ottoman and later Romanian writers connected him with the stake, and the title, the Impaler, gradually became the name by which history remembered him. Around this hard core of violence, legends multiplied. One tale described a golden cup left beside a public fountain, untouched because no thief dared to steal it. Another told of a foreign merchant whose missing property was recovered through the prince's terrifying justice. Other stories claimed that Vlad punished dishonesty, adultery, poverty, idleness, or minor failures with death. These anecdotes come from German and Slavic narrative traditions written after, or near the end of, his lifetime. They often contradict one another. German accounts generally presented Vlad as a bloodthirsty tyrant, while Slavic stories sometimes portrayed the same cruelty as the source of perfect order. Neither tradition can be accepted without criticism. The image of a country made completely safe through terror is a moral fable, not an administrative record. Yet its existence reveals something important. Whether people hated Vlad or admired him, they understood his authority through fear. At the same time, he continued to act pragmatically abroad. During the early years of his second reign, he still paid the customary tribute to the Ottoman Sultan. Open rebellion would come later. In 1457, he assisted Stephen, the son of Bogdan II, in seizing the Moldavian throne. A friendly ruler in Moldavia strengthened Vlad's eastern frontier and gave him an ally whose interests sometimes aligned with his own. But danger remained close. Rival claimants to the Wallachian throne found protection in Transylvania. Among them was Dan, a member of the competing dynasty branch of the ruling family. The Saxon towns of Brasov and Sibiu could shelter these rivals, finance them, and interfere with Wallachian trade. Vlad had broken much of the opposition inside his court. Now he would carry the struggle across the mountains. And as his soldiers approached the wealthy Saxon settlements of Transylvania, the violence used to control Wallachia would become part of a larger war, one fought with armies, commerce, rival princes, and stories designed to survive long after the bodies had disappeared. Part 5: War Beyond the Mountains. North of Wallachia, beyond the forested passes of the Carpathians, stood the fortified Saxon towns of Transylvania. Brasov and Sibiu were wealthy centers of trade within the Kingdom of Hungary. Their German-speaking communities possessed privileges granted by Hungarian kings, maintained strong defenses, and connected the markets of Central Europe with the lands south of the mountains. For Vlad, these towns were both necessary and dangerous. Wallachian merchants depended upon routes passing through Transylvania. Weapons, metal, cloth, and manufactured goods moved south, while livestock, wax, hides, and agricultural products traveled north. But the same roads that carried merchandise could also carry an army, or a rival prince. After Vlad seized the throne in 1456, several of his opponents found refuge among the Saxon communities. Dan, a member of the rival dynasty branch of the ruling dynasty, settled near Brasov. In Sibiu, support gathered around another claimant commonly identified as Vlad the Monk, an illegitimate half-brother of Vlad Dracula. These men were not harmless exiles. With money, soldiers, and Hungarian approval, either could cross the mountains and attempt to take Wallachia. In December 1456, Ladislas Hunyadi instructed the people of Brasov to support Dan against Vlad. The political situation soon became even more unstable. Ladislas was executed by the Hungarian king in March 1457, and members of the Hunyadi family rebelled. As Hungary descended into internal conflict, Vlad saw an opportunity to act against the communities sheltering his enemies. His forces crossed into southern Transylvania in 1457. The fortified centers themselves were difficult to capture, so Vlad attacked their surrounding villages and estates. Buildings were burned, property was taken, and prisoners were carried back toward Wallachia. Early German narratives describe executions on a large scale. The basic fact of destructive raids is supported by other evidence, but the reported numbers and many of the most dramatic scenes are difficult to verify. This violence served several purposes at once. It punished the Saxons, deprived the rival claimants of support, brought movable wealth into Wallachia, and demonstrated that the mountains could not protect Vlad's enemies. Negotiations followed the raids. By November 1457, representatives of the Saxon towns had reached an agreement with Michael Szilágy, a powerful Hungarian noble and ally of Vlad. Brașov was expected to expel Dan, while Vlad promised reciprocal protection for merchants. Traders from Sibiu would be permitted to buy and sell in Wallachia if Wallachian merchants received similar treatment in Transylvania. For a short time, commerce created peace where diplomacy alone had failed. In January 1458, Matthias Corvinus, the younger son of John Hunyadi, became king of Hungary. He instructed Sibiu to preserve peaceful relations with Vlad. Yet the agreement remained fragile because the central dispute had not disappeared. The Saxon towns still feared Vlad's power, and Wallachian pretenders continued to live north of the frontier. The conflict was also connected to trade, though its economic causes are sometimes described too simply. Some historians have argued that Vlad attempted to force Saxon merchants to sell their goods only at designated border markets, protecting Wallachian traders from foreign competition. Direct evidence for such a complete protectionist policy is limited. What the documents do reveal is a cycle of confiscation and retaliation. Saxon authorities seized goods belonging to Wallachian merchants. Vlad responded by arresting Saxon traders in his territory and taking their property. By early 1459, relations had again collapsed. A contemporary letter written by Vlad's enemy Dan claimed that 41 merchants from Brașov and the surrounding Burzenland region were impaled. A later German narrative increased the same episode to 600 victims. The difference is revealing. Dan was not a neutral observer, and even his smaller figure must be treated cautiously. Yet the rise from 41 to 600 shows how quickly genuine violence could expand when transformed into political literature. Dan remained in Brașov, waiting for another opportunity. A second claimant, Basarab Laiota, established himself in Sighisoara and offered to fight Vlad if the Saxons would finance him. Wallachia's throne was again becoming the prize in a contest organized beyond its borders. In the spring of 1460, Dan finally crossed the mountains with armed supporters. His campaign ended quickly. Vlad defeated his force near the northern approaches to Wallachia and captured the pretender. German stories claim that Dan was forced to dig his own grave and listen to prayers for the dead before being executed. The account may preserve a real public humiliation, but its details come from hostile narrative sources and cannot be independently confirmed. Dan's death was certain. The theater surrounding it is less so. Vlad then carried the war back into Transylvania. His soldiers devastated settlements in the outskirts of Brașov, seized prisoners, and punished communities accused of supporting his rivals. Reports of collective executions appear in several traditions, although their scale remains disputed. By July 1460, another peace had been negotiated. In his correspondence, Vlad once again addressed the citizens of Brașov as his brothers and friends. The language was courteous, but the settlement rested upon fear, exhaustion, and temporary political necessity. Only weeks later, Vlad attacked the regions of Amlas and Făgăraș, where supporters of his enemies were still active. Peace on this frontier rarely meant the end of violence. It usually meant that the next conflict had not yet begun. The war with the Saxons left behind more than damaged villages and disrupted trade. It produced stories. Accounts of Vlad's punishments circulated through German-speaking Europe. Some contained precise locations and dates, suggesting that they drew upon reports from people who had witnessed the raids or their aftermath. But the narratives also multiplied victims, combined separate events, and added scenes designed to make Vlad appear more terrible than the tyrants of antiquity. A German text known as the History of Voivode Dracula was probably composed in the early 1460s. Its tales later spread through manuscripts and printed pamphlets. By the end of the 15th century, editions decorated with grim woodcuts were being sold in cities across the Holy Roman Empire. Vlad became one of the early monsters of European print culture. The Saxons had real reasons to remember him with hatred. Their merchants had been arrested, their settlements attacked, and their people killed. But their stories were not written as balanced histories. They were the literature of enemies, and later, useful material for rulers who needed to explain their own dealings with Vlad. The truth therefore lies between two comforting myths. Vlad was not an innocent defender invented as a villain by foreign merchants. Nor can every atrocity attributed to him be accepted simply because his rule was brutal. He deliberately used terror against civilians, traders, political refugees, and rival claimants. His enemies then enlarged that terror through repetition and print. By the end of 1460, the most immediate threats from Transylvania had been weakened. Dan was dead, the Saxon towns had accepted peace, and Vlad's hold upon Wallachia appeared stronger than ever. He had secured the court. He had silenced a rival dynasty. He had forced the wealthy towns beyond the mountains to negotiate. Now only one power remained capable of overwhelming him completely. South of the Danube, the Ottoman Empire was watching. And the tribute expected from Wallachia would soon cease to arrive. Part 6. The Winter War across the Danube. By the closing months of 1461, the fragile peace between Vlad Dracula and the Ottoman Empire had reached its end. Historians cannot identify the exact moment when Vlad stopped paying tribute. Some later accounts suggest that payments had been withheld for several years. An Ottoman chronicler, however, placed the open break in 1461, while Sultan Mehmed II was campaigning far to the east, against Trebizond. What is certain is that Vlad was no longer behaving like an obedient vassal. Mehmed demanded that the Wallachian prince appear before him. The Sultan sent Thomas Katabalinos, a Greek secretary in Ottoman service, together with Hamza Bey, the governor of Nicopolis. According to Ottoman and Greek narratives, the invitation concealed a second purpose. Hamza was to capture Vlad near the Danube and carry him to Constantinople. Some details of this episode remain uncertain, but the mission ended disastrously for the Ottomans. Vlad discovered the plan and reversed the ambush. Near Giurgiu, his soldiers surrounded the Ottoman party. Hamza Bey, Katabalinos, and their companions were captured. Several independent chronicles report that Vlad later had them executed by impalement, with Hamza receiving the most prominent stake because of his rank. A famous story claims that Vlad nailed the turbans of Ottoman envoys to their heads after they refused to remove them in his presence. Yet the tale survives mainly in later narratives, and it cannot be securely connected to this embassy. It belongs to the uncertain borderland between recorded violence and the legend already forming around Dracula's name. After eliminating the mission, Vlad attacked the Ottoman fortress opposite Giurgiu. One account says that he approached while wearing Ottoman clothing and used the Turkish language he had learned during his years as a hostage to persuade the guards to open the gates. The story is plausible, but its dramatic details cannot be independently confirmed. The fall of Giurgiu opened the road south. During the winter of 1461 to 1462, Wallachian forces crossed the Danube and struck Ottoman territory. In the pale winter landscape, fortified posts, river crossings, military stores, and settlements were attacked from the region of Nicopolis toward the lower Danube. The campaign disrupted the basis from which an Ottoman invasion of Wallachia might be launched. But it was not a clean war fought only between soldiers. Vlad's own records admitted that men and women were killed. Villages were burned, and civilians living under Ottoman rule were counted among the dead. Later nationalist memory would sometimes present the campaign as a heroic defense of Christianity. That interpretation conceals the suffering of those who had little control over the empire governing them. On February 11, 1462, Vlad wrote to Matthias Corvinus, King of Hungary. Attached to the letter was a list of settlements and casualties. The surviving manuscript copies give totals of either 23,884 or 23,889 Turks and Bulgarians, while their individual figures do not add up consistently. The number must therefore be treated cautiously. It was Vlad's own report, written while he was requesting Hungarian assistance. not an independent investigation. Even so, the list reveals the scale of the campaign and Vlad's desire to demonstrate that there could be no return to submission. He declared that he had broken the peace for the defense of Christianity and the Hungarian crown. Faith may have mattered to him, but so did political survival. Without foreign support, Wallachia could not withstand the full power of Mehmed's empire for long. Matthias offered encouraging words, but no great army immediately appeared. South of the river, the Sultan received news of burned settlements, destroyed garrisons, and executed officials. Vlad's younger brother Radu remained at the Ottoman court, available as a more obedient claimant to the Wallachian throne. As winter faded, Mehmed began assembling an invasion force. When the Danube thawed, the conqueror of Constantinople would march north, and Vlad would have to defend his country against an army far larger than his own. Part 7. The Night Attack. In the spring of 1462, Sultan Mehmed II began moving north. The conqueror of Constantinople would personally lead the campaign against Vlad. This was more than a raid intended to collect unpaid tribute. Mehmed meant to remove a rebellious prince, restore Ottoman authority over Wallachia, and place Vlad's younger brother Radu on the throne. Contemporary chroniclers described an enormous Ottoman army. Some claimed that it contained more than 100,000 men, others offered even greater figures. Medieval writers frequently exaggerated military numbers, however, and no reliable total survives. What can be said with confidence is that Mehmed's force, including infantry, cavalry, artillery and naval support, was considerably larger than anything Vlad could assemble. In early June, the Ottomans forced their way across the Danube. Vlad attempted to resist the crossing, but he lacked the men required to hold the river against Mehmed's infantry and cannon. He withdrew into the Wallachian interior and abandoned any hope of defeating the Sultan in an open battle. Instead, he began destroying the land in front of the advancing army. Villagers and livestock were moved away from the Ottoman route. Food stores were removed or burned, and some accounts report that wells were contaminated. Small Wallachian units watched from forests and marshes, striking isolated soldiers before disappearing again. The policy protected neither homes nor harvests. Vlad was sacrificing parts of his own country to deny them to the invader. For the people ordered to leave their villages, survival depended upon how much food they could carry and whether they could find shelter before the armies arrived. Mehmed continued toward Targovist, but his soldiers advanced through a landscape that seemed almost empty. They found little food, few animals, and no Wallachian army willing to accept a decisive battle. Vlad understood that exhaustion alone would not stop them. He needed to strike at the center of the empire itself. On the night of June 16th to 17th, the Ottoman army camped south of Targovist. Thousands of tents stretched across the darkness, surrounding the guarded position of the Sultan. Vlad gathered a selected force and prepared an attack whose purpose was not merely to kill soldiers. His true target was Mehmed II. One chronicle claims that Vlad entered the camp in Ottoman clothing before the attack, using his knowledge of Turkish to locate the Sultan's quarters. The story is possible, considering his years as an Ottoman hostage, but it cannot be independently verified. Several hours after sunset, the Wallachians charged into the camp. Torches moved between the tents. War horns sounded through the darkness. Horses broke loose as men awoke without knowing where the enemy was, or even which shapes around them were friends. Vlad's soldiers moved rapidly through the outer sections of the encampment, trying to reach its center before the Ottoman troops could organize. But somewhere amid the smoke, noise, and confusion, the attack lost its direction. According to the historian Leonikos Chalkokondyles, the Wallachians reached the quarters of the Grand Viziers Mahmud Pasha and Ishak Pasha instead of the Sultan's position. Other accounts describe failures of coordination between different sections of Vlad's force. The precise sequence remains uncertain. Mehmed survived. The Janissaries and other Ottoman troops formed defensive lines, and before dawn Vlad withdrew. Later sources offer sharply different casualty totals, ranging from limited losses to many thousands. None can be accepted with confidence. The attack had failed in its central objective, yet it demonstrated extraordinary daring and left the Ottoman camp shaken. Mehmed continued to Targovist and found the Wallachian capital largely deserted. Outside the city stood the site that would become the darkest symbol of Vlad's reign, a broad field of impaled bodies. Chalca later described approximately 20,000 victims. That number is almost certainly exaggerated. An Ottoman participant named Envery confirmed seeing a field of impaled people but gave no total. One recent scholarly reassessment suggests that roughly 1/600 to 1/700 victims may be more plausible, though this too remains an estimate. The bodies probably included Ottoman soldiers, officials and civilians captured during the Winter Campaign, together with victims executed during earlier years. The display was not created simply from cruelty without purpose. It was arranged as psychological warfare, a warning that occupation would carry a terrible price. Mehmed eventually withdrew his main army from Wallachia. The night attack and the field outside Targovist contributed to the campaign's atmosphere of fear, but they were not the only reasons. Shortages, constant harassment and the difficulty of forcing Vlad into battle also weakened the invasion. Yet the Sultan did not leave empty-handed. Radu remained behind with Ottoman support, offering the Wallachian nobility peace, stability and an end to Vlad's destructive war. Vlad had survived the army of the conqueror. But while Mehmed marched south, the foundations of Vlad's throne were beginning to collapse. Part 8. The crown passes to a brother. When Mehmed II withdrew his main army from Wallachia, Vlad had reason to believe that he had survived the greatest danger of his reign. The Sultan remained alive, but his invasion had failed to destroy Vlad in battle. The Ottoman army had endured shortages, repeated ambushes and the chaos of the night attack. Yet beneath this apparent survival lay a more serious defeat. Vlad was losing his country from within. Mehmed had left Radu behind with Ottoman troops and a clear political mission. The younger brother was to become Prince of Wallachia, not through one decisive battle, but by persuading the country's leading families to abandon Vlad. Radu could offer something his brother no longer could, the possibility of peace. Many boyars had suffered under Vlad's attempts to centralize power. Some had lost relatives, estates or influence during his purges. Others may have supported his war against the Ottomans but now feared that continued resistance would bring another invasion and further destruction. Accepting Radu meant recognizing Ottoman supremacy and resuming tribute. For many nobles, however, limited submission appeared safer than following Vlad into a war that Wallachia could not win alone. The change did not happen immediately. Vlad continued to resist from the forests and mountain regions, attacking forces loyal to Radu and attempting to preserve what remained of his army. But every week made his position weaker. He lacked money to maintain soldiers and mercenaries. The Hungarian reinforcements he had requested still had not arrived. As boyars defected, their armed followers and local resources passed to Radu. By late summer or early autumn 1462, Radu controlled much of the country and was increasingly recognized as its ruler. A later legend claims that Vlad's first wife threw herself from Poenary Castle into the river below rather than be captured by the Ottomans. The story has become a familiar part of Dracula folklore, but no contemporary source confirms it. Even the identity of Vlad's first wife remains uncertain. It should therefore be treated as legend rather than biography. The documented reality was less theatrical but no less severe. Vlad had lost his throne. He turned north toward Transylvania, seeking the assistance that King Matthias Corvinus had previously appeared willing to provide. The Hungarian king had received encouragement and financial support from Christian powers for a campaign against the Ottomans. Vlad may have expected weapons, soldiers and another chance to recover Wallachia. Matthias arrived in Transylvania in November 1462. Vlad met or negotiated with representatives of the Hungarian court for several weeks. What followed remains one of the most disputed episodes of his life. Instead of receiving an army, Vlad was arrested. At Matthias's command, the Czech mercenary leader John Jiskra of Brandy seized him near Rucker, close to the mountain passage between Wallachia and Transylvania. The prince who had spent months avoiding the forces of Mehmed II was now a prisoner of the Christian king from whom he had requested help. To justify the arrest, the Hungarian court produced letters allegedly written by Vlad to Mehmed II and other regional leaders. In them, Vlad supposedly offered to cooperate with the Ottomans against Hungary if the Sultan restored him to power. The authenticity of these letters has long been questioned. Many historians consider them forged, possibly to provide Matthias with a convenient explanation for abandoning an expensive anti-Ottoman campaign. Their unusual language and submissive tone appear difficult to reconcile with Vlad's recent actions. However, because the original political negotiations are poorly documented, the exact motive for the arrest cannot be proven with certainty. Matthias may have feared Vlad's unpredictability. He may have wished to avoid war with Mehmed, or he may have considered Radu's rule an acceptable source of stability along Hungary's southern frontier. Vlad was taken into Hungarian custody and eventually brought to Visegrad, a royal residence and fortress overlooking the Danube. Popular images often place him in a dark underground dungeon for more than a decade. His earliest confinement may indeed have been strict, but he was not necessarily kept in chains throughout the entire period. His conditions appear to have gradually softened, and he later lived under supervised residence closer to the Hungarian court. The precise length and nature of his captivity remain uncertain. For approximately 12 years, however, Vlad was removed from Wallachian politics and kept under Matthias's authority. During those silent years, stories began spreading beyond the regions where Vlad had ruled. German-language accounts described banquets beside impaled victims, mass executions and punishments of almost unimaginable cruelty. One later rumor claimed that Vlad captured rats and placed them on tiny stakes in prison because he could not abandon his violent habits. There is no reliable evidence that this happened. Such stories reveal more about the growth of Vlad's reputation than about his daily life in captivity. Some reports were based on real executions. Others came from political enemies, frightened witnesses, or writers who understood that horror attracted attention. While Vlad remained confined beside the quiet waters of the Danube, his image traveled across Europe without him. The prince had lost his country, his army, and his freedom. But history had not finished with Vlad Dracula. Years later, as Ottoman power once again threatened the lands beyond the Danube, the imprisoned prince would become useful to Hungary, and the door of his captivity would slowly begin to open. Part 9: The Last Return. By 1475, the political world beyond Vlad's confinement had changed. His brother Radu was dead. Wallachia had passed into the hands of Basarab Lyota, a ruler whose position increasingly depended upon Ottoman approval. In Moldavia, Prince Stephen III had become one of the strongest opponents of Ottoman expansion north of the Danube. The imprisoned prince was becoming useful again. Stephen sent representatives to Matthias Corvinus and requested Vlad's return to the frontier. For Hungary and Moldavia he offered experience, a legitimate claim to Wallachia, and a reputation that might still inspire resistance, or fear. After approximately 12 years in Hungarian custody, Vlad was released. This was not an act of forgiveness. Matthias was restoring a political weapon. Some sources state that Vlad converted from Eastern Orthodoxy to Roman Catholicism before or during his return to favor. The conversion was probably connected to his new position at the Hungarian court, but the surviving evidence does not reveal how sincere it was or precisely when it occurred. Vlad also married Justina Szilágyi, a Hungarian noblewoman related to Matthias. The marriage tied the former prisoner more closely to the king's political world. For a man who had once ruled through isolation and terror, survival now depended upon alliances, marriage, and royal permission. In early 1476, Vlad again fought the Ottomans, this time in Hungarian service during operations in Bosnia. The surviving accounts continue to associate his campaigns with severe punishments, although individual stories are difficult to verify. He was no longer the independent prince who had challenged Mehmed II in 1462. He was a commander serving the interests of larger powers. By autumn, Matthias authorized a campaign to remove Basarab Lyota from Wallachia. Hungarian forces under Stephen Bathory advanced from Transylvania, while Stephen III of Moldavia attacked from the east. Vlad traveled with the coalition, returning toward the country he had lost 14 years earlier. On November 8, 1476, the Allied army captured Targovist. About a week later, Bucharest also fell, and Basarab fled toward Ottoman territory. Vlad had returned to the throne for the third time. He confirmed the commercial privileges of the merchants of Brasov. Despite the bitter conflict he had once fought against the Transylvanian Saxon towns. He also attempted to restore a functioning court and requested craftsmen for his residence at Targovist. These actions suggest that Vlad understood the need for political accommodation, but he was given almost no time to govern. The Hungarian and Moldavian armies had achieved their immediate objective. They could not remain in Wallachia throughout the winter, and most of their soldiers soon withdrew. Stephen of Moldavia left a small personal guard to support Vlad. But the exact size of the force remaining with him is uncertain. Once again, Vlad stood upon the throne without enough men to defend it. Basarab Lyota returned with Ottoman assistance. The final battle probably occurred in late December 1476 somewhere near Bucharest, perhaps along the road leading south toward the Danube. Neither its precise location nor its full sequence can be reconstructed. Vlad's remaining army was surrounded and destroyed. A letter written by Stephen of Moldavia on January 10, 1477, confirms that Vlad was already dead and that nearly all the Moldavian soldiers left with him had also been killed. The manner of Vlad's death is uncertain. One account says that an Ottoman assassin entered his camp in disguise. Another claims that Vlad's own soldiers mistook him for an Ottoman during the confusion of battle and killed him. A Milanese diplomatic report states that his body was cut to pieces by the enemy. These versions cannot all be true and none can be proven conclusively. The most defensible conclusion is simply that Vlad died during or immediately after a battle against forces supporting Basarab. He was probably in his mid-40s. Later chroniclers reported that his head was taken to Constantinople and presented to Mehmed II as proof that the Sultan's old enemy was finally dead. The story is plausible and supported by more than one later account, but the precise treatment of the remains cannot be confirmed. The location of Vlad's body is equally uncertain. A popular tradition places his grave at Snagov Monastery, on an island north of Bucharest. Yet this association was recorded centuries after his death, and archaeological investigations did not securely identify his remains. Another theory proposes Kamana Monastery, a religious foundation connected to Vlad and located closer to the probable battlefield. No conclusive grave has been discovered there either. The prince who had used bodies as public messages vanished without a certain tomb of his own. His third reign had lasted only a few weeks. There was no final speech preserved by a witness. No reliable account describes his last thoughts. The ruler who had spent his life fighting for the same throne died defending it once again, surrounded by enemies and abandoned by most of the allies who had restored him. Vlad Dracula was dead. But his name had already escaped the limits of his lifetime. It would travel through poems, chronicles and printed pamphlets, changing with every retelling. The Wallachian prince would gradually disappear beneath the image of a monster, and centuries later beneath the shadow of a vampire. Part 10, From Prince to Vampire. Vlad Dracula's life ended on a battlefield in the winter of 1476. His legend had begun years earlier. While Vlad was still alive, or confined in Hungary, German-language stories about his cruelty circulated across Central Europe. Some were connected to the Transylvanian Saxons, whose towns and commercial interests had suffered during his reign. Others were repeated at courts where Vlad's removal from power required political justification. The earliest accounts were not pure invention. They preserved recognizable places, campaigns and punishments. Vlad had executed political rivals, attacked civilian settlements and used impalement as a public display of authority. But real events were joined to exaggeration. The number of victims grew. Executions became elaborate spectacles. Vlad was portrayed dining peacefully among the bodies of the dead, observing suffering as though it were entertainment. By the late 15th century, printing allowed these stories to reach a much larger audience. Pamphlets decorated with disturbing woodcuts were sold in German cities. Vlad became one of early European print culture's most notorious figures, a distant Eastern tyrant, whose violence could both horrify readers and encourage them to buy the next edition. Yet another tradition presented him differently. A Slavic work commonly called the Tale of Voivode Dracula, probably composed during the 1480s and often associated with the diplomat Fyodor Kurutzin, also described Vlad's brutality. But in this version, cruelty sometimes served a political purpose. Vlad punished thieves, corrupt officials, and dishonest merchants. Fear created order. One famous story claimed that a valuable golden cup could be left beside a public fountain because no one dared to steal it. This tale cannot be verified as an actual event. Its meaning, however, is clear. The German story saw a sadistic tyrant. The Slavic tradition sometimes saw a terrifying ruler whose severity made law possible. Neither image is neutral. Each was shaped by the political concerns of the society preserving it. Ottoman memory retained Vlad as Kazikli Voivoda, the impaling prince, a rebellious vassal who had slaughtered Ottoman subjects and challenged the Sultan. In later Romanian memory, especially during the age of modern nationalism, he increasingly appeared as a defender of the country against foreign domination. That interpretation contains truth, but also anachronism. Vlad defended Wallachia and fought Ottoman expansion. He also fought for his dynasty, his throne, and his personal authority. 15th-century Wallachia was not a modern nation-state, and his campaigns did not protect every person living within it. Many of those killed by his forces were civilians, political opponents, or subjects whose loyalty he doubted. To recognize the exaggerations surrounding Vlad does not require denying his violence. The enormous totals repeated in hostile literature are often unreliable, but mass executions and deliberate terror are well documented. He was not the only ruler of his age to employ extreme punishment. Impalement existed in both Ottoman and Central European practice. Yet Vlad used it repeatedly and transformed it into an unusually powerful language of political intimidation. For 4 centuries, however, he remained a historical ruler rather than a supernatural creature. Then, in 1890, the Irish writer Bram Stoker encountered William Wilkinson's An Account of the Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia. Stoker was researching the novel that would eventually become Dracula. His notes show that the villain originally carried another name. After reading Wilkinson, Stoker selected Dracula, a word the book associated with the devil. The historical origin was more complicated. Vlad's father had been connected to the Order of the Dragon and was known as Dracul. The name Dracula could identify Vlad as the son of Dracul, the son of the dragon. Over time, Romanian words associated with dragon and devil became intertwined, making the name especially attractive to a writer of Gothic fiction. How much Stoker knew about Vlad III remains disputed. He borrowed the name and fragments of regional history, but there is little evidence that he conducted a detailed study of Vlad's life or impalement campaigns. His Count Dracula was a fictional Transylvanian aristocrat, an immortal predator who drank blood and commanded supernatural forces. The historical Vlad was a Wallachian prince. He was mortal, Christian, and rooted in the political struggles of the 15th-century Danube frontier. There is no evidence that his contemporaries believed he was a vampire. Stoker's novel, published in 1897, eventually became more famous than the ruler whose name it borrowed. Stage productions and films added new details: the black cape, the elegant castle, the foreign accent, and the aristocratic seducer. The vampire gradually consumed the prince. Places with little or no meaningful connection to Vlad were later advertised as parts of the Dracula story. Bran Castle became the most famous example. Even though there is no solid evidence that Vlad ever lived there and Stoker never visited Romania, the legend had become more profitable than the history. Behind that legend remains a more difficult human figure. Vlad was a survivor of hostage politics, a ruler formed by exile and dynastic murder, and a commander willing to confront an empire far stronger than his own principality. He was also an authoritarian prince who used collective punishment, intimidation, and calculated cruelty against both enemies and civilians. He was neither the flawless national savior celebrated by some traditions nor the supernatural monster created by fiction. He was a ruler of a violent frontier who believed fear could preserve a throne. For a time it did. Fear helped him discipline nobles, defeat rivals and slow an Ottoman invasion. But it also created enemies, encouraged propaganda and isolated him from the political support he needed to survive. In the end, Vlad won neither lasting independence nor a secure dynasty. He died after a reign of only a few weeks without a certain grave. Yet his name endured longer than the kingdoms, armies and princes that surrounded him. The vampire belongs to literature. The legend belongs to the cultures that repeatedly reshaped him. But the historical Vlad Dracula remains in the uncertain space between resistance and tyranny, a man whose real life was already dark enough without the need for immortality. And beyond the stories, the winter landscape of Wallachia becomes quiet again. The armies disappear. The torches fade. The abandoned throne waits in the darkness. Only the name remains.